Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. And I am so pleased to be joined by, of course, our great Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Mazie Hirono, Representative Meng from my great home state of New York, and Representative Kim. So thank them all for coming. Now, I want to thank Senators Hirono and Meng for leading the charge on the legislation. I want to thank Speaker Pelosi and Congressman Kim for coming and lending their great support for this as well. We all know over the past year there's just been an awful rising tide of violence and discrimination against Asian Americans. It's driven by fear, it's driven by misinformation, it's driven by age-old prejudices, from shouted insults to racial slurs to actual physical assaults. I attended 5 or 6 rallies in New York while we were on break, and the stories break your heart. An elderly man came over to me and he said, "I'm afraid to walk down the street in New York City because I might be ridiculed, cursed at, even spat upon." A young lady told me she stopped going to work because she didn't want to ride the subway because the stares, the hostile stares of people were so piercing. And then, of course, we've had worse, actual violence. Every day in America, in this 21st century America, Asian Americans fear that they might be insulted, assaulted, or even worse. Sadly, the recent wave of anti-Asian violence is not a new chapter in American history. The AAPI community has long suffered bigotry and racism in this country. But we cannot and must not remain silent. And there is a new fervor to speaking out because there have been so many incidents in the last year or two. And part of that, I have to say, was because our last president never discouraged, or almost never discouraged, and often seemed to encourage bigotry from people. And he often led it himself. In America, an attack on one group is an attack on all of us. So it's now up to all of us to stand up and speak out in support of the Asian American community. And in the Senate, we have more than a responsibility just to speak out. We have a moral imperative to take action. So that's why this week I'm using my power as Majority Leader to make sure the Senate will vote on Senator Hirono's COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which my fellow New Yorker, Representative Meng, has sponsored in the House. This common sense legislation will give the Justice Department crucial tools to crack down on the wave of racist violence we have seen against the AAPI community, and I'll leave it to the sponsors to go over the details. We are open to strengthening the bill. There's an effort underway to add a bipartisan amendment sponsored by Senators Blumenthal and Moran, one a Democrat, one a Republican, as an amendment. And their bill would provide resources to state and local law enforcement to improve hate crime reporting, increase training, and establish pathways to rehabilitation. So reporting, training, rehab would be the 3 words that underline their amendment. Now, combating hate in the Asian American community can and should be bipartisan. The way to do that is for 60 senators to vote to proceed to the legislation. I hope it'll be many more than 60. Who would oppose this very simple but necessary legislation? As Majority Leader, as I said, as Majority Leader, it's my intention to make the First Amendment a bipartisan one. But I can't do that unless our Republican colleagues allow us to debate the bill. Make no mistake, the Senate will debate and take action to combat hate crimes against Asian Americans. There is no reason this shouldn't be a bipartisan bill that passes the Senate without delay. This is not some kind of gotcha piece of legislation. It's legislation our times demand. There's reason, so President Biden has urged Congress to swiftly pass this legislation and get it on his desk, and we're going to work very hard to get that done this week. And now I'll turn it over to somebody who has fought bigotry her whole life, Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Leader Schumer, for bringing us together this morning for this very, very important legislation. I thank you for bringing folks from both sides of the Capitol, and I'm grateful for your appeal for bipartisanship on, again, this is important legislation. I want to thank Senator Hirono and Tammy Duckworth, Senator Duckworth as well, and of course we're very proud of Grace Meng and her leadership on this legislation. She also had another hate crimes bill earlier, in the last Congress. So she's been on this with great ideas, leadership, and values. And to Andy Kim, thank you, from New Jersey, for your leadership on this as well.
That's close.
He means New York is close to New Jersey. Again, thank you, Senator Schumer. Here's the thing. The senator talked about the visits that he has made into the community and heard the concerns that people have put forth. I myself last week was in Chinatown in San Francisco. I visited the Northeast Medical Services Center, which is a recipient of our rescue package money. So it was very hopeful to hear how the community, the AAPI community, was taking the lead in a culturally and linguistic appropriate way to reach out to the community and successfully test, trace, vaccinate, and the rest. Again, leading the way. Leading the way. It gave us so much hope. It was so sad also, though, to hear the stories of fear that people had in the community. Again, I represent San Francisco in the Congress. This is a place where we take such pride in our AAPI community, as I'm sure in Hawaii and New York and New Jersey you do as well. But in San Francisco, we're small, and the community is large, and we are very dependent. In fact, we learn a lot from that community. A week before, I had virtually visited with them with our regular meeting that we usually have to talk about housing and any number of other issues of concern to the community, where public policy has an impact and where values are our guide. And so again, the community has been an intellectual resource for improving life for all of us in our country. Actually, I voted in Chinatown at Limpu Li post office. That's the first post office named for he actually worked for Phil Burton.
Really?
And then Phil named a post office for him. So you see. So, and again, the roots run deep. And that's one of the messages I had that day. When the press asked about what are we doing, let us salute President Biden. Right from the start, within like 24 hours of his presidency, he had executive order calling upon the Justice Department, even before we had an Attorney General, calling upon the Justice Department to take up this issue in a very specific way. And again, more recently, his executive actions have been very important. So let us salute him, but let us do also what the leader said the president asked us to do, to pass this legislation. It will be marked up in committee within the next week in our House. We'll pass it immediately and send it over to the Senate, but they have their own version of the bill too. So at some point, we'll have a meeting of the legislation and to pass it, to send it on to the president. Just as a matter of experience in our community and the rest, it breaks your heart to see how communities are affected by these hate crimes, and how parents are so protective of their children not feeling that negative attitude. I mean, also, the targets are sometimes older women. I say that as an older woman, and I say to them, when somebody is about to make some kind of an attack, listen to what they are saying, because what they say is what is evidence as a hate crime. It shouldn't have to be that high a standard if the intent is so clear. But the fact is, for now, what we have to do is to make sure we get the words. And I said some of us who are, shall we say, older, don't have all of the familiarity with some of the lingo that people might use. And if you are, again, English is your second language, you might not recognize it for the intention that is there. So again, we have to do our part here in terms of legislation and making the law. Grace Meng in our house, I can speak to this, has been relentless. I've visited her in her district and seen the beautiful diversity of AAPI in her community, and she is a magnificent spokesperson for them. But I do not have the privilege of yielding to her. It's my privilege to yield to our former House member, a person we take great pride in, and I mean, every time she speaks, we all think, she's ours, she's ours, she came from the House, Senator Hirono. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi. I have to admit, my heart is still with the House. No offense, but it is what it is.
He started there, too.
That's right.
Everyone here served in the House at one time.
Good training, I have to say. And I'm really appreciative of the leadership shown by Representatives Meng and Kim in the House. We know we're going to be marking up this bill in the House, and we are going to bring this bill on the floor of the Senate, which wouldn't happen if Leader Schumer were not the leader in the Senate.
Former House members.
It makes a difference. So we've all seen the horrific incidents of unprovoked targeted hate crimes against AAPIs. And these kinds of hate crimes have gone up in every single state. Significant percentage of increase in targeted hate crimes against AAPIs in every single state and in DC. As an AAPI person, it does give me pause. If I was walking around outside, I would have my earbuds on, I'd be listening to books on tape. I would never do that now because of the incidents of totally unprovoked hate crimes against AAPIs. And sadly, in the history of our country, these kinds of discriminatory actions against AAPIs, who are generally viewed as the other and therefore kind of easy to target, but we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, we had the incarceration of 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II, the horrific killing of Vincent Ching. These kinds of discriminatory actions are not new. But what is new is we now have a president who has taken responsibility, who has condemned these kinds of crimes, who has taken action by issuing executive memorandums, by calling on and directing the Department of Justice to begin the process or continue the process of paying attention to these kinds of targeted crimes. So this bill that we're bringing to the floor of the Senate is very simple. It should be totally non-controversial. What can be so controversial about a voluntary reporting by the states of these kinds of crimes? It's voluntary. If a state does not want to participate, they don't have to, but one would hope that there will be universal condemnation all across the board, all across our country, by all peoples against this kind of targeted hate crimes. So what this bill does is it just requires the Department of Justice to designate a person who will do an expedited review of these kinds of hate crimes. It asks the Department of Justice to work in conjunction with the state and local law enforcement to ensure that the word gets out in appropriate language, culturally appropriate, that these kinds of crimes should be prevented, should be reported. And it sets up a way where we can report these crimes in as easy a way as possible. So online reporting. These crimes are very much underreported, as we all know. And so my hope is that we will have Republicans who will support this bill. My hope is that we will have Republican members of the House and the Senate speaking out, condemning these kinds of targeted crimes. And so we will go forward in the hopes that, you know what, an attack on one group in our country is truly an attack on all of us. And there is no place in a democracy for these kinds of unprovoked attacks on a group of people who are only being targeted because they are AAPIs. And words matter. So when you have a president who deems the virus to be the China virus, or to have members of his administration refer to it as Kung Flu, you'd create an environment where people will be motivated because of whatever reasons they have to commit these kinds of crimes. It is very important we now have a president who speaks out and who takes a stand. It is now time for Congress. It is time for Congress to take a stand and pass this legislation against this kind of targeted, unprovoked attacks on AAPIs.
Thank you, Mazie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Majority Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi for bringing us together this morning. It's an honor to join both of you and to be with my outstanding colleagues. I do want to say a special thank you to Speaker Pelosi, who has been very publicly standing with the AAPI community from the very beginning when we started to see the increases of these types of incidents across the country. And Senator Schumer, my home state senator, is not exaggerating when he says that he's been to a few rallies to protest this kind of bigotry. He's been at every single rally I've been to, and he's probably been to more than that. So thank you for your solidarity. You all know that for more than a year, the Asian American community has been fighting two viruses, the COVID-19 pandemic and anti-Asian hate. The attacks that have been occurring against the community have been horrifying. We've heard about and seen videos of both young and elderly Asian Americans being shoved to the ground, stomped on, beaten, spat on, and shunned. These heinous acts have been outrageous, unconscionable, and they must end. There have been assaults all across the nation, including in my home district of Queens, New York. To help combat this bigotry and violence, I introduced legislation with Senator Hirono that would, amongst other things, create a position at the Department of Justice to facilitate expedited review of COVID-19 hate crimes, encourage more reporting of incidents in multiple languages, and help make different communities feel more empowered to come forward and report these incidents. Oftentimes, we tell people to just report if something happens to them, but it's not always so easy to do so. People might not know where the police precinct is, people might have language obstacles, and we also need more resources for our local entities to be able to figure out how to most effectively investigate these types of incidents. As Speaker Pelosi said, oftentimes the lingo and the tropes that are being used might not be something that is already familiar to our law enforcement personnel. This bill also directs federal agencies to work with community-based organizations to find ways to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic in a way that is not discriminatory. I'm thrilled that our legislation is moving forward, and I'm hopeful that the measure will be approved by the Senate and the House. Over the past year, I've met with so many Asian American community members whose lives have been threatened or whose loved ones have been attacked. And this bill takes into account what I've heard from the community. People need to feel empowered to come forward and report these incidents. We need to make that process easier and more accessible. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to visit Atlanta, Georgia with our KPAC chairwoman, Judy Chu, and also Rep. Kim, who is here today, where we met with the families of the victims and that were killed in the mass shooting. They all agreed in the midst of their pain and sorrow that we need action now. Over 3,800 cases of attacks have been reported over the past year. But we all know that the number of incidents is likely higher. Most of us know people who've had these incidents happen to them on different levels and yet have not reported them. So increased reporting of hate crimes would give us more accurate data. It would give a clearer and fuller picture of the attacks that have been occurring, so we know what resources specifically are needed. Combating hate should not be a partisan issue. This is about the safety of all Americans. It's about people's lives and their right to be safe. It's about our parents and grandparents walking down the street safely. It's about our kids being able to go to school and play outside without fearing that they'll be harassed. We must all, as Democrats and Republicans, stand together against this racism and violence and say enough is enough. We must demonstrate that we all have the Asian American community's back and underscore that an attack on the Asian American community is an attack on all of us. We have to rise up and show solidarity against this intolerance. We have to take action to combat this xenophobia and violence, and supporting this bill would greatly help us achieve all these critical goals. Once again, I can't thank enough Leader Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, and my colleagues for supporting this legislation and standing with the Asian American community. And I also want to thank President Biden for endorsing this bill and calling on Congress to pass it. Let's do everything in our power to fight this racism and violence that has plagued our community. Thank you so much. Next, I want to introduce Representative Andy Kim, who has been a tremendous voice in humanizing so many of these incidents that have been happening across the country. Andy.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and giving us an opportunity to share today. I'm Congressman Andy Kim from New Jersey. We are, this week, 1 month out from the shootings in Atlanta. And just for me personally, I can tell you this has been one of the most difficult months of my life. A month where I've gathered with the AAPI community all over the country, and we shared the rawness, the vulnerabilities, the fear that we all collectively experience. This is a historic moment right now. And I want to underscore that, so I'll say it again. This is a historic moment right now for the AAPI community in America. There has never been a situation during my lifetime that I've felt this level of fear and this level of vulnerability and also a level of isolation that I do right now. And when we were down there in Atlanta talking to the victims' families, as well as the broader community, one question kept coming up, which is, what are you going to do about this? What is Congress going to do about this? That is the demand being made right now, and it's a demand that is justified given the violence and the discrimination that the AAPI community has faced, not just in the last month, not just in the last year, but over the course of our entire lives. Over the last month, I've shared stories I've never shared before. I've opened up in ways that I never have before because the moment calls upon it. I've talked about how when I worked at the State Department as a diplomat, I was banned from working on issues related to Korea because I'm Korean American. I talked about how my 5-year-old son came home and told me that a bigger kid kept calling him Chinese boy, over and over again as a 5-year-old. This issue of foreignness and xenophobia has been with us, and I fear that actually it could get worse as we know that our global competition with China is growing. We, right now, at this moment, need to think about as a nation how it is that we will embrace and talk about and incorporate the AAPI community in our nation. That's what this moment is. I really do believe that the next few weeks will determine the next few decades of how Asian Americans are treated and understood and accepted in this country, And that is the period in which my kids will be growing up into their adulthood. So I will do everything I can to make sure that we seize this moment and get this passed. So when that Asian American community down there in Atlanta asks me, what are you going to do about it? Next time I go back down there to Atlanta, I want to be able to look them in the eye and tell them we did everything that we could at this moment to try to fight for justice and equality and allow you to be able to feel safe here in your own country. That's what this is about. And if we deliver anything less than that, we will have failed this moment in time. So I just ask everyone to think about it. Whatever disagreements you have or whatever improvements or amendments you want to make them. But let us not fail to deliver something here that can move our country forward. With that, I'm grateful again for the opportunity to speak alongside such distinguished colleagues. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. We're going to have, Speaker and I are going to have to leave pretty soon because of the memorial service, so we'll take questions on this subject first. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Tia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Can you give us, the actual timeline of how you plan to do this?
Yes. The bill is on the floor now. We will move a motion to proceed. We're waiting to hear. Our Republican colleagues haven't yet told us what their plans are. They're having their lunch today, and we hope that they will move forward with the bill and not block it and just go forward. So we hope to get it done this week if we don't have real obstruction.
Leader Schumer, I was wondering how you balance a bill that tells DOJ to more aggressively investigate and prosecute these the anti-Asian, the hate crimes against them, with Rep. Tlaib's comments last night about no policing and no incarceration.
Well, look, we all know we have to root out systemic bias in law enforcement, and we feel the best way to do that is the Justice in Policing Act. I don't know if it passed the House this year, but it passed it last year, and we are making every effort to move it forward in the Senate. I will put it on the floor for a vote.
If I could add,
Yeah.
if I could add something to that. Providing more resources and dedicated personnel and helping to streamline the process helps with data and reporting. We know that not every one of these incidents will ultimately be charged or even prosecuted as a hate crime, but we want to make sure that local entities, law enforcement, have the tools they need to know what is a racist trope, what helps prove intent if there is a hate crime that's charged. The legislation also includes components that would contain counseling and education if and when someone is convicted of a hate crime.
Okay, yes. Right there.
Collins is saying that she could support this legislation if the language were tweaked to remove a reference to the hate crime being linked to COVID. Is this something that Democrats would support?
Well, we'd have to discuss it. We'll wait and see for the Republican lunch, but we certainly are open to amendments that are germane, and that one would probably be germane. Yes?
Follow up on that question, is it going to be a challenge to accurately collect this data if these crimes have to be specifically related to COVID-19?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry. Say it again?
Is it going to be a challenge to be collecting accurate data and potentially holding people accountable if these crimes do have to be specifically related to COVID-19, because that may be hard to prove intent on both racism and related to COVID?
Go ahead, Grace.
Yeah, I mean, the intention of this bill originally was to get a more clear and accurate picture of what happened during this last year, during the COVID pandemic. But of course, this is something that we're interested in the long term. This hate crimes legislation doesn't only pertain and help the Asian American community, it would help all communities before and after COVID.
Last one.
Do you think adding the Blumenthal-Moran amendment would put more pressure on Republicans to support it? And do you have support for Moran if that?
You'll have to ask him. I think it's a good amendment. It's needed. It's bipartisan, and we'd like to see it added to the bill. It's not a political issue. It's a substantive issue. It's a good amendment. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Grace.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
Allison said she was